So a very warm welcome. I'm Tom Cliffe from Track NN, and I'm delighted to be talking to Kirstie today. So we're going to ask a few questions and have a little bit of a chat to find out a little bit more. So thank you for joining us, Kirstie. The first question that I have is that at Track, we recognise that every individual has their own experience of diagnosis. Could you tell us about your experience and how that made you feel, really?
Yeah, I think I had a fairly positive experience. The only thing that was more difficult was that I wasn't diagnosed until adulthood, so things potentially could have been a bit easier earlier on, but that's sort of just the way it went. But post-diagnosis, the support I've received has been great. I've had support from the ADHD and Asperger's team, and that was sort of also about what diagnosis meant for me, what it would mean to now know that I am autistic, how it might impact what I think about myself, how I feel about myself in relation to other people. So I feel like that was all covered quite well, and support with that. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. In terms of, obviously, at Track, we focus around education and employment. What are your sort of experiences with employment, education, employers, and what sort of adaptations have they made, and what were the impact of these changes?
I've been quite fortunate to be at uni, so I have access to disabled students allowance, which can fund some of the adaptations and the support that I potentially wouldn't otherwise get if I wasn't a student. So at uni, I have a specialist autism mentor. I meet with her once a week. I also have note-taking in class, so for me, it's sort of enough to be there and be processing the content and having to be around people socially, thinking about how I might respond. And then that meant I wasn't taking notes because my brain can do all of those things. So I got note-taking along with my DSA, and that's really helped because it's helped me to be sort of present and more focused whilst I'm in the classroom, but then I'm coming away and I've got the notes made by someone else that I can then read later, sort of at a time that suits me, and go through that as slowly as I need to. It's also meant that I have a person to navigate the campus with me, so someone is with me when I walk to lectures, whilst I'm in lectures, and coming away from class as well. So that's quite useful because the environment can be a bit overwhelming in a sensory sense, so with the lights and the sounds, but also socially there are a lot of people around on campus, and yeah, it's hard to try and factor in what might happen. There could be sudden changes, and it's good to have someone with you if that happens. In terms of in class, there are some opportunities, I suppose, to work in groups. However, I find it easier to work alone, and my lecturers have facilitated that. The same with presentations. They're asking me, how would I prefer to do that? Do I want to do it just to the lecturers or to the whole class of 30 people? I suppose it's all about reasonable adjustments, and even something as simple as, are the lights okay? Are you able to process this? Are you hearing what I'm saying? I suppose it's about checking in with the person, and everyone's needs are going to be different. I'm also the disabled students officer at the university, and I've had a lot of autistic students come to me, and actually what I've noticed is they do need different things. They are asking different things, and they're individual. At the end of the day, they may have the same sort of label as autistic, but that doesn't mean that they're going to need the same things. And one of the things I was given by DSA is Brain in Hand. It's an app that supposedly helps autistic people with things like scheduling and organization, but for me that's actually one of my strengths. So I was given it as more of a sort of tick box thing, I suppose, and it will help some students, but it won't help all students. I think that's the key thing for employers and schools or education settings to understand, is that don't put any adjustments in place without talking to the individual, because everyone has different needs, and certain people might not need certain things, whereas others may need more than what the sort of baseline is.
That's absolutely fantastic, and that message is very powerful about meeting individuals. And we've met with lots of different employers, and they'll all have different levels of experience or different ideas, but that message about meeting individual needs is so powerful. In terms of, for you, do you have plans of what you'd like to go on to do after university? In terms of employment, is there an area you'd like to go in? And I mean, you've sort of already given a message to employers about meeting individual needs, but what are your plans after university?
I think for me at the moment, I'm doing my master's, so I've just finished my undergraduate, and I decided to stay because I felt like I just got used to the environment and the people and finally found ways that were working for me. So to leave at that point felt really counterproductive. I'd potentially like to stay on further and do a PhD, and I will admit that that's partly because for me, the educational setting and environment is a really safe place. I get a lot of support that I don't know whether I would get in the working world. It is quite a good setting if you're autistic and you like that sort of thing, like the research and the people you're around, the minds you're around is great. And also I think in relation to work, something that worries me is my functioning can fluctuate quite a lot. So some days I will be able to do certain things like go into class and be around 30 people, whereas other days I can barely get myself out the front door. And I think with the working world, that might be quite difficult. I think I would only be able to manage a part-time job, potentially, because I think it's exhausting just having to cope with the social interaction and the sensory input that often I'll go into uni one day and I will need the next day to just be in my flat with reduced sensory stimuli and just not see people. And the same with, for me, I can present to a room of people and not feel particularly nervous, but if you put me on a one-to-one level, then that brings up different challenges and that surprises people. And also I can send an email really confidently, but using the telephone is something that I really struggle with. For example, just to get the words out of my mouth can be a challenge. Whereas, for example, this doesn't faze me because I know what I want to say. It's about my experiences. I feel like I can't necessarily get it wrong. And there's been a lot of support as well. So I think within the working world, I would potentially opt to stay within the university setting, even if that means I end up in an admin role or something at the university. The degree that I have and the courses that I'm now doing, I suppose I'm just doing for enjoyment. I'm not necessarily thinking, oh, I'm going to become a lecturer or I want to use this to go into clinical psychology. I've mostly done it as, something I enjoy, and that although stressful at times, isn't, in my opinion, as stressful as being in the sort of the real world or the working world. It might be because the only employment I've been in was before I was diagnosed with autism. So potentially there weren't any of the reasonable adjustments or adaptations on offer to me at that stage because I didn't know and I wasn't seen as being autistic.
Thank you so much. It's a great insight into kind of what you want to go on to do next, and fantastic to hear about, you know, the importance of that environment and actually the huge range of skills that you've got. As another question, are there any sort of negative experiences you faced or challenges that you mentioned a little bit there about perhaps before you were diagnosed? Obviously, you know, and to make it clear to people watching, the fact that you were diagnosed at a certain age, you were born autistic. It's just you found out, and I think it's really important to clarify that for people, because I've met a lot of people that assume you only start being autistic the minute you're diagnosed. And did you face any challenges or have any negative experiences that that you've been able to kind of, you know, look at now and then kind of adapt things for the future?
Yeah, I think since getting the diagnosis, I've been able to be a bit kinder to myself. And for example, you can kind of blame the autism. Like, I know you've got a sense of personal responsibility, but if you have a bad day or you feel like you mess up a social situation or you don't read something correctly, you can step back and say, it's okay, it's not my fault, I'm autistic, this is just the way I process things, or I do need extra time, or my brain is slightly different to my friends or other people. I think one of the most difficult things I've noticed since being diagnosed is that people kind of see it as a problem, or they use it to assume what your functioning is. So I've had somebody say to me, I didn't know autistic people went to university. And that sort of stops you because you think, wow, okay, I don't know what to say to that. It's about education and it's about awareness, but when people hold those assumptions, or for example, yeah, I think it is around people assuming. When I was first diagnosed, the term Asperger's was still being used, and people would say, oh, but you're high functioning, so it's fine. You can do all of these things. You can behave like everybody else. And potentially you can do some of the things that other people are doing, but it might come down to masking, or it might be absolutely exhausting. And people are either making the struggles the only thing that they're looking at. So they're saying you can't do this because you're autistic, or it's going the other way and it's saying, oh, but you can do that, so therefore you can do it. Or they expect you to be able to do it every day just because you've done it once. Yeah, I think that's potentially the society that we are in at the moment. It is improving and it can hopefully only get better, but I think it depends on how people are looking at the label and what people think when they think of the autism spectrum.
Thank you so much again for coming to talk to us, Kirstie. Really appreciate your time. And I think what you've said there is incredibly powerful. And I know I could certainly listen to you talk about it for much longer. But thank you so much for joining us. That was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.